Good morning to all of you. It gives me great pleasure to welcome to this audience Sri Pallav Bagla, a well-known science journalist, communicator and photojournalist of the Indian media. He has been in this for more than 2 decades, and he has been regularly writing for Science, the weekly magazine of the American Association for Advancement of Science, AAAS, and also last decade or so he has been with the NDTV, where most of us have seen him in action. He is well known for his coverage of the Indo-US nuclear deal, many others, including Chandrayaan, Mangalayan, all those things. But I think the feather in his cap is the latest admission by the International IPCC,
The Intergovernmental Panel.
Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Control, that they made a mistake. He was the one who first pointed out that their conclusions on the extinction of the Himalayan glaciers was wrong, and they were said voodoo science, they derided Indian science, they derided Pallav Bagla, they derided everything, and finally after 7 years they were magnanimous enough to say, sorry, we made a mistake. I think that probably is a major achievement of Pallav Bagla. He's also a very well-known photographer, and I recollect seeing one of his exhibitions in Delhi. According to the write-up which he has given to me, he has not had that in Bangalore. I don't know why he doesn't like Bangalore. Maybe one of these days he will do it. He has been well recognized, and the list of awards is fairly large. But one award I feel very proud about is the National Award for Outstanding Award in Science and Technology Communication in Print Media by the Department of Science and Technology when I was there. When I was just leaving, perhaps.
Around that time.
Around
yes.
that time. He has also received awards from the Nuclear Society for Science Communication, and international awards like a National Award for David Perlman Award for Excellence in Science Journalism, and several others. These are typical of his recognition. In other words, basically he has been well recognized. Now he has written here, visiting professor of science. He is not a visitor for a day. He is with us for 2 months as the Raman Pai Chair Professor in Science Communication here. If you may recall that of late we have been concerned about science communication, not only science communication, communication in general of research results, because that is one of the mandate of NIAS, and except for a few newspaper articles once in a way, we are not very good at it. And I had requested him, why don't you come here, spend some time with us, and tell us how we can do it. In the process, you will also get a sort of a well-deserved holiday from your day-to-day running around in NDTV. He continues to run around for NDTV, sitting here also, but we don't question his running around. He's young enough to run around. So with these words, I will invite Pallav to talk about challenges of communicating science in India. Every word is important. India is not the rest of the world. Sometimes I feel India is no worse than the rest of the world, but India is India, so there are some specific idiosyncrasies of the Indian society. Communicating science has become a challenge in the last, at least in the last few decades, for a few years, it has become really a challenge. We had seen the Kudangulam, we had seen the genetically modified brinjal, and the decisions which are being taken are far from satisfactory. In fact, we get a feeling that the decisions are being made having the eyes closed and refusing to listen to anything which makes sense. At one time I in fact made a statement that if you have a heart problem, don't go to a heart specialist because he has a vested interest in it, because he needs your money. So go to anybody other than a heart surgeon if you have a heart problem. That is the situation we are moving into in today's world. So he will share some of his experience with us, and maybe also tell us some of the secrets of communicating science to the rest of the world, which you could use in our day-to-day life. These words, let me once again welcome Pallav and to deliver his lecture. Please.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here at NIAS.
Okay.
Professor Ramamurthy, there are so many in the audience who have been, one way or the other, either gurus or sources of information, and anyone who's a source of information doesn't become a friend to me. I have a very strict boundary. It becomes a conflict of interest otherwise. I can't report stuff. At heart, I am a science journalist. What I'm speaking about today is going to go beyond journalism and look at communication. I'm very fortunate to have been given this opportunity to come and spend time at NIAS, wonderful institution. I have interacted with the faculty here for a long time. In fact, I have tramped these grounds well before NIAS came. In 1986, I was at the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, and did bird watching in these corners, ate imli from the trees which were growing here. And then later I have interacted with Rana when he found that new monkey. He's just cut his beard, otherwise he resembles that monkey he found in Arunachal. And I love that. Sharda, I have interacted with her Chola bronze work. Professor Ramamurthy, obviously, when he was secretary, as a science journalist, interacting with the secretary is like breaking bread with the person who makes the policy and decides the policy. And there are so many others. Dr. Navalgund is there. Karnik is there. Karnik, he knows my work from very recent times, the Mangalyaan work. Now, for me, the big issue is, there are challenges in communicating science. The way forward is how to bridge the gap between the scientist and the public. And there are opportunities and there are ways of doing it. As Professor Ramamurthy said, very recently we've seen the trust which was there between scientists and the public being eroded. Classic examples, the genetically modified foods, the BT brinjal controversy. Imagine, BT cotton, a runaway success, and BT brinjal was stopped. Then the whole issue of the Kudunkulam nuclear plant. The same thing happening in Jaitapur in a slightly different fashion. The whole issue with mobile phones and radiation, it affects every one of us every day. We are worried. And to touch on a very specific and touchy subject in Bangalore, the S-band scandal. My God. A complete non-issue which in my opinion was made to erupt into a volcano. What I will not do today is to talk about nuclear energy. I will not talk of genetically modified foods and threats related to radiation and mobile phones. There's another talk coming up later in May on communicating risk. So I'm leaving that for that particular area. What I'm trying to do here is to try and give a flavor of the way I have practiced science journalism. I have never been trained in science journalism. I have never been trained in television. Yet, for the last 25 years, I have done what I have done, and I have done it with passion. I don't do anything in life if I don't want to do it. If I didn't want to be at NIAS, NIAS could have offered me $1 million and they wouldn't have gotten me standing here. I feel very strongly that there is a need to bridge the gap between the scientists, and when I say scientists, it can be extended to all academicians. This institution has a very strong faculty in social sciences. It applies as much. I'm sure Professor Setar is internally a little worried of what might come on May 16th. The changes which may come and the kind of tinkering with history which may happen or may not happen. Who knows? It's a complex world. There are many, many things which will unfold. But at the same time, it is very important that the trust which has been lost with the public needs to be reclaimed. And today's modern technology offers a solution that scientists can do it without my being there. I can hide behind this and there is no need for me to be there. Internet offers wonderful solutions. There is no need for an intermediary of a journalist to be taking the science to the people or the stresses which are happening between society and science. I will try and elucidate that. What I hope to do is I'll show 3 features which I did for NDTV, which I would say is the ugly, the good, and the very good. And these are features which I have done, and I'm not saying they are the best, because there are many ways of doing science communication, and I have practiced only one slice of it. Even though I have done print, I have done photography, I have done television, I have done internet, I have done blogs, I have done social media, I am dabbling with all of them. But believe me, I'm still learning. It's a huge knowledge base out there, and we are practicing a very small part of it. These stories, 3 stories I have selected, are not, I would say, the most representative, but they in a way show certain aspects of what I need to talk about. So I'm sure in the audience people will be able to judge and say, no, that was better, or somebody else did that better. I have no quarrels with that. There are many other people who have done many things much better, and I'm still learning. In my assessment, there is an abiding interest in the public, and not just in India, everywhere, in science, technology, environment, these are things which affect us, and health. Everybody is worried about it. Everybody wants to know more and more about it. But the issue is to give people information in a language they can understand. And a lot of it is done sometimes with jargon. The challenge is to remove the jargon, keep the accuracy level high, and the bigger issue will come is how to translate it into local languages. 22 languages in India. I started doing television, and this is an admission I'm making in public for the first time. It was not for the love of television, but NDTV offered me the opportunity to transcend the illiteracy barrier. Whatever I was writing for science was available to the international audience. Whatever I was doing with Indian Express was writing in the English audience. When I started doing television 7 years ago, it gave me an opportunity to cut through the illiteracy barrier and reach people, especially the Hindi audience. Fortunately or unfortunately, I speak only Hindi and English. I'm married to a Malayali, so I understand a little bit of Malayali. So if somebody throws an epithet at me, I can understand it. But beyond that, a little hard for me to take it forward. But these 2 languages, and I love the Hindi audience. They are vast, they are knowledgeable, they ask the sharpest questions. When there are call-in programs, you realize that. So when there is an abiding interest in this, why in recent times is the trust being lost? There are many reasons for that. In my opinion, quite a bit revolves around scientists and academicians spending more and more time doing their own work and not engaging enough with the public. Classic case being the hit and miss which happened in Kudankulam. The arrogance of the Department of Atomic Energy, and I'm using that word with great care and specificity, that probably led to what happened at Kudankulam. One village humbled a whole department which gave India the nuclear bomb. Outstanding. If you ask me, by way of communication and outreach for that village and those few people, what an achievement. But has the department learnt a lesson? Wait till May. This aspect I will deal with in my May discussion, if Professor Ramamurthy and Nyas permits me to give a talk. I have some insights on that. The world around us is surrounded by science and technology. Even some of the most remote tribal people in India have in some way or the other a touch with science and technology. Leave aside the tribals who live on North Sentinel Island in Andaman Nicobar, who are still living in the hunter-gatherer days. And it's the beauty of India which permits people to live in those conditions. The Americans and the Australians wiped out their aboriginals, literally. So it's the strength of our country which permits all shades to live. With that basic premise, there is more and more need for people to engage with science. The recent controversies we have seen, and one of the most worrying controversies, particularly for me, is the whole business related to clinical trials. All of us want to use medicine, but most of us are very worried of clinical trials. There is reason to it because there have been bad clinical trials and people have been used as guinea pigs. The Supreme Court is hearing that. The Supreme Court in India adjudicates on everything. What should really be executive matters are really done by the Supreme Court of India. That's the way it is. The Supreme Court is hearing a petition on clinical trials. The first story I want to play out for you is a story I did on May 14th last year, which is a success story. And I'm calling it, it's a great success, but by way of communication, it was a huge failure. This is the success of the rotavirus vaccine. Rotavirus is a microbe which causes diarrhea in very young children, literally newborns. Lakh of children die every year. Indian scientists developed a vaccine. And for the first time, this was an Indian vaccine developed in India, being taken forward in a successful trial. We had very able people who were involved with the trial. Dr. M.K. Bhan, who was for several years the Secretary of the Department of Biotechnology, and somebody whom I dearly love for his pioneering communication initiative, the former director of NCBS, Dr. Vijay Raghavan. He was the then Secretary of the Department of Biotechnology. But they failed to capture that there is a larger community other than print, the print medium, which could have taken the story forward. I'm showing you a video clip, but that's a clip which I did for NDTV. And NDTV is slightly unique. We worked very hard ahead of time to get our visuals. Television is all about visuals. It's not about Times Now and Arnab Goswami. That's a very different genre of television. It's about taking people into where things happen. So this is a story about the making of the rotavirus vaccine. Have a look at it. Not sure how well I or NDTV did, but we were the only ones who did a television story with great detail on this.
Good evening. Tonight we lead the bulletin with a major medical achievement, a matter of pride for Indian scientists. For the first time, an indigenous vaccine against diarrhea, which is one of the biggest killers of children in India. 1 lakh children die every year. This vaccine, made in India, will cost less than 50 rupees and is now at its final stages of testing after having cleared all initial safety and efficacy trials. Scientists who have worked on this say it is the first new vaccine developed in India. Pallav Bagla has exclusive access to this story.
These tiny viruses are a parent's nightmare. Every year, 1 lakh children in India die of diarrhea caused by the rotavirus. But now there's hope. Indian scientists have developed an oral vaccine to be given in 3 doses. It's called Rotavac and can prevent children from getting infected with the virus that causes loose motion, vomiting, fever, abdominal pain, and even severe dehydration.
We have done almost more than 8,000 babies from phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 trial effectively, and it's meeting the international standards, not even Indian standard, international standard. And we have really, this is the first safety and efficacy trial conducted in India.
NDTV got rare access to the laboratory in Hyderabad where the vaccine is being made. To enter the laboratory, one has to wear some very special clothing for protection. A special form of the rotavirus is grown on these red-colored plates. It is then purified, tested, and bottled for use as a vaccine. The virus strain was first identified over 25 years ago by researchers at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences in New Delhi. Since then, with funds over $100 million from the government and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, it is now ready for use as soon as regulatory approvals come through.
This is the first new vaccine developed in India, and we are the first developing country manufacturer to develop this new vaccine. See, this gives a confidence now that we can do ourselves. India can do it itself.
India giving affordable healthcare to the world. Bharat Biotech is promising that they can sell this rotavirus vaccine at under 50 rupees a dose. A very important development as it can save over 1 lakh of children every year from fatality. In this very clean and modern facility with camera person Vadnala in Hyderabad, Pallav Bagla for NDTV.
Not sure whether we were able to capture all the excitement around the vaccine. We led the bulletin that particular day with this story. To lead a bulletin with a story of a success is rather rare. Journalism is all about pulling out dirt from under the carpet, pulling out stuff which nobody wants to hear about. But what I felt very sad and disheartened me was this particular story, which should have really been the lead story for every channel and every newspaper, was missed for 2 or 3 reasons. There is involvement of the Department of Biotechnology, there is involvement of the Indian Council of Medical Research, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation are involved. Anybody who's worked with Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation knows they understand the value of publicity. For them, that is their heart and soul, literally. A press release was made, about 2 pages. That's it. A press conference was held. There is no still photos. There is no video. There are no interviews. No journalists are led into the laboratory where this Rotavac vaccine is developed. What a failure. Simultaneously, what is happening? The country is battling the whole controversy regarding the vaccine against cervical cancer. Not sure how many people are familiar with that, but that's a vaccine which is given to adolescent girls to prevent this very dreaded form of cancer which happens in the cervix. Almost a non-scientific issue tripped that trial. And this particular rotavirus trial is using pregnant mothers and newborn children. If you ask me, for human trials, the most potent combination, yet it succeeded. It succeeded because the scientists worked very hard, that the communication challenges were overcome. But in the last mile, they tripped. And I point this out as a failure of communication and not as a failure of the trial. It was an outstanding trial done. It took 20 years for the vaccine to come out. It's still awaiting the approval of the DGCA for final use in humans. But for most channels and most newspapers, there were no pictures. You needed interviews of mothers who went through the trial. I did not get that. You needed pictures of children who took the vaccine shots. You needed pictures of the vaccine. We worked very hard to get access into Bharat Biotech and shot ahead of time so that the moment the embargo lifted on the story at 2 o'clock on May 13th last year, we went with the story. But the same day, no other journalist can get that kind of access. I felt sad. I felt very sad. For my channel and for me in person, nobody else had the story. Wow. That's the best that happens in journalism. When you get everything and nobody else does. But does it help India? I don't think so. It didn't help India. The second story I want to show is of an issue, of an area which deals with an organization which works and should work in complete secrecy. More secret than the Indian Space Research Organization. But yet, they did come out and explain things in a fashion that was needed. I'm talking of the Defense Research and Development Organization. The DRDO had been pillared in 2011-2012. Some had also dubbed it as the Defenseless Research and DUD Organization, DRDO, not the Defense Research and Development Organization. We felt slightly differently. So when India was getting around to testing for the first time its intercontinental ballistic missile, the ICBM, the Agni 5 missile, I know there are many people in this audience who are far more informed about missiles, rockets, and things of that nature, and have had greater access. But here was DRDO, which took us inside into their complex and showed things which people had never seen. After the story is played out, I will explain there were many political, geopolitical, and strategic reasons for doing what they did. But that DRDO opened its laboratories out was fascinating. The story is about the making of the Agni 5 missile. Most people have seen the shots of Agni 5 rising from Wheeler Island and going off on its trajectory and striking 5,000 kilometers away in the Indian Ocean, not too far from where the Malaysian plane has gone down, the first Indian missile which crossed the equator. There are 2 or 3 technologies which are critical in the development of missiles. And for people who are not familiar with missiles, and I understand there are people in the audience who would not know, an ICBM has to be a fire and forget missile. You launch it from Jhumri Talaya, aim it on Shanghai, it should land on Shanghai. Nobody should be able to jam it in between. And how do you do that? It has to have a sophisticated navigation system, an inbuilt navigation system, something called a ring laser gyro. And let's leave it there. This is a technology which India developed. And if you have to send shivers down the backs of your opponents, then you tell them that we have this. So when you use a ring laser gyro, there is no communication happening between the missile and the person who has fired the missile. So when there's no communication happening, nobody can stop the missile. Even the opponents cannot jam the missile. The second thing is when a missile goes up, a ballistic missile, it goes out of the atmosphere and then it comes down. When it re-enters, it faces the heat of the atmosphere, the re-entry heat. So for that you need very special materials, which is, they use the carbon-carbon composites. ISRO uses different silica tiles, which also I have seen firsthand. So here I was taken inside, and when I was taken, and I can say this was done in Hyderabad, there are times when I am told you can't disclose locations. In this also, the place where the ring laser gyro is made, I was not allowed to show the exterior of the building. You will not see that. And the exterior of the building you see is not the place where the ring laser gyro was made. And I was literally taken blindfolded to that place. The second was the challenge to show how a missile, when it re-enters, it faces huge amount of heat, and the electronics has to survive. At the end of the day, it is the bouquet you are carrying in the missile which matters. Whether you're sending flowers for Pervez Musharraf or you're sending a nuclear bomb, that has to survive. When the exterior temperature is about 3,000 or 4,000 degrees centigrade, the internal has to still be about 50 degrees. So there was a challenge for me how to explain. People from DRDO and I sat down together to explain. They said, put sensors here, show temperature there, that is the way. I finally used a very simple technique, which is subjecting myself as a guinea pig in the experiment. Take a look at it. This is an example where a highly secretive organization did very well in explaining stuff.
In fact, Pallav also visited inside the missile complex there as the Agni 5 was being readied. As we said, when it successfully launched and completes its mission, if it does, it will be India's first intercontinental ballistic missile test.
Agni 5, India's first intercontinental ballistic missile, can strike targets 5,000 kilometers away. But once fired, it cannot be stopped as it uses a highly sophisticated laser-based navigation system shown on television for the first time. To enter the secret facility, you have to wear a very special clothing. This indigenous technology is highly guarded. India's missile program is its jewel in the crown for the Defense Research and Development Organization. I'm wearing this clean suit and I'm inside the heart of the program. NDTV takes you into the very heart of India's missile program, where precision guidance equipment is made which uses lasers. The missile is 17 meters tall, but in it has almost a 7-kilometer length of wiring. But one of the most difficult things to master was making the heat-resistant material that protects the re-entry vehicle when it comes back into the atmosphere.
You talked about the re-entry vehicle, which has to be lighter.
That's Dr. Sekran from the DRDO.
Called carbon reinforced composite materials, which gives you a strength of equivalent to the steel, but at the same time much lighter in weight. With that material, we manage the heating as well as the structural requirements also during the severe re-entry conditions. I mean, that has been developed in-house.
But does it really work? NDTV actually tested it. I am inside the heart of India's missile complex. This is no ordinary tile. This is a tile which flies on the Agni series of missile. This 1 centimeter or so tile, the temperature on the other side of this tile is about 3,000 or 4,000 degrees centigrade. To protect the sensitive equipment, the temperature inside the re-entry vehicle has to be very low. If I can touch this tile on this side, while there is a flame of 3,000 degrees on the other side, that means this technology is working. Now I will go and touch this tile. I can touch this tile, which means this particular carbon composite technology developed by DRDO indigenously is working. This will ensure that the re-entry vehicle, when it comes into the atmosphere and goes in for its strike, it works. With camera person Nagraj, in Hyderabad, Pallav Bagla for NDTV.
A little bit of a backstory on this. To shoot this, I needed night time. You need to show the flame. You can't do it daylight. The laboratory doesn't have curtains. I said, I want to shoot at night. The missile complex literally shuts down at night. So they had to make some very special arrangements and permissions so that we are permitted to shoot at night. We shot once, finished the whole job. There are no second takes in a situation like this when you have a flame which is hardly 8 inches away. We played back the video. There was no audio in it. Big lesson. When you do very special things, make sure that you listen to what is happening on the camera before you leave the location. By then it was 10:30 or 11 at night. I requested the DRDO scientists to stay on. 80 or 100 people who had stayed back, including firefighters, because what you don't see in the frame are people who are there with buckets and fire flame and everything ready in case I catch a fire. We did it again and we succeeded. And I had to specifically do this, which is to touch this. My children and wife, they hated seeing this video. They had fire so close. And if the hand of the flamethrower moved a few centimeters here and there, it comes straight onto your face. And you have very little opportunity to save yourself. But then there is the scare of the Gandhis, Maneka Gandhi. If you used animals to test it, easiest is put a mice there, put the flame below, the mice doesn't get burned. The moment you show it, you get Mrs. Gandhi chasing you down for violating the ethics of animals. The option was, do it yourself. Our audience loved it. I did once in English, once in Hindi. Everything I do on television was done twice. Now, if DRDO can open up and take me deep inside these very secret facilities, what is stopping the Raman Research Institute from doing it, or the Indian Institute of Science from doing it. I can't report of NIAS because conflict of interest issues, I can't talk about that, but other institutions can certainly do it. ISRO is changing, ISRO does it, but there are many other institutions which need to open up. But in the end, my own feeling was there was a deeper strategic interest in this. If you're able to show your enemy that you have the capability to make the technology, you have deterred the enemy. And that served wonderful purpose for the country. In a way, this shoulder was ably used by the national security establishment to send a message to both our eastern and western neighbors, because the 5,000-kilometer range of the missile is specifically targeted for our neighbor on the east. And it did serve the purpose. But again, if DRDO can do it, why can't others? I shot this several weeks before the test happened. The understanding was that we will use it on the day of the launch. And obviously, for a journalist, the day of the launch is the big day. You don't want to waste a good story before that. But then, if there is an embargo, we follow the embargo. Karnik has seen me sticking to my embargoes. Karnik is the person who's in charge of public affairs from the Indian Space Research Organization. I don't violate embargoes. I don't violate embargoes. There are only two occasions when I violate embargoes: if somebody's life can be saved. No embargo can stop me from sticking to it if somebody's life can be saved. That's the only occasion. We held on to this material till the last day and aired. And I'm sure our channel got what was due from such exclusive access. And the country also probably benefited. There have been other places where I have been given access, where I have been told, you are the first and the last journalist ever to come here. Nobody has come before this, nobody will come after this as well, which is the, yes, it happens in the nuclear establishment. The shoot I did in the critical facility where they are testing thorium in Bhabha Atomic Research Center, you must have seen it, sir. The heart of the Arihant, the INS Arihant, which is our nuclear submarine, to see the nuclear reactor which powers it, the light water reactor. First and last, never will ever be allowed anybody.
I understand first. How do I don't understand last.
I was told so, sir. I can't say, I can never promise that. In fact, in all my stories, what I always tell people is, you give us the access, but I will never say, don't give others access, to deny others access, because that is a very standard principle. Once you get access to going close to the Mangalyaan and literally touching it, then you say, now don't give it to CNN, IBN, don't give it to Times Now. There are people in the audience who will vouch. I never say that. I will say we will do better than what others have done. That is my guarantee. The third story I want to show, and I'll show a part of this, unless people in the audience want to see the full interview with the chairman of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So, in my personal opinion, the first was a failure of communication, the second was a success of communication. The third is the issue of the Himalayan glaciers, which Professor Ramamurthy mentioned. It was a personal trial, and believe me, it was a very personal trial of sorts. Here was a story in which I think both science and science journalism in the end triumphed. And when both triumph, it is the best that can happen. Just to prime people, in this year, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, which is chaired by Dr. R.K. Pachauri, the Director General of the Energy and Research Institute, TERI in Delhi. He's been the chair of IPCC now for the second term. they released their report. They had a similar, this is called the AR5. Before that, there was a report called AR4, which was released in 2007. In 2007, when they released the report, they had said that the glaciers in the Himalayas would melt away by 2035. It was a fact which didn't gel with me. I read the report. When I was a baby, less than a teenager, my mother held my hand and I have walked on glaciers. I was born on the banks of the Ganga in Kanpur. So there is a personal affinity to what would happen to glaciers. I chased that fact down. When it didn't gel with me, saying such a large amount of glaciers, can it melt in 30, 35 years? It didn't seem correct. Then I started poking with Indian glaciologists. Have a look at that story. This is a story which challenged my personal integrity, the integrity of my editors. Had it not been for my editors at Science, believe me, I wouldn't have been standing here. I would have lost my job in 2009 and would have been discarded in history. And the Indian glaciers theoretically would have melted by 2035. Only 2036 would people wake up and say, hello, they haven't melted. What happened? Have a look at this story. So this is a story. First there is the video clip, and then followed by it is the interview with the chairman, where he makes that, which he himself told me later was an intemperate statement of calling it voodoo science. I'll probably stop it at voodoo science unless people in the audience want to hear more. It's otherwise a 7-minute story. Take a look at this. I also got a very major award for this called the Perlman Award, which is considered by many the Oscar of science journalism. Fascinating, because I became the first Asian to receive it. And I credit my peers who recognized the value of flowing against the tide. Take a look at this story. This is from 2009. And in the picture, you will also see a man who is currently in flavor with what is happening with Prime Minister Manmohan Singh. You will see Jairam Ramesh.
Now, it's controversial news on the eve of the big climate change conference in Copenhagen. All this while we've believed that Himalayan glaciers are receding because of global warming. But a new report by India's Environment Ministry says that's not true. They say that glaciers are actually expanding, findings that are in direct conflict with the doomsday predictions forecast by the UN panel on climate change. Pallav Bagla has the story.
It could be a controversy of Himalayan proportions. The government has today debunked the UN Climate Change Panel report, saying its doomsday prediction on glaciers is wrong. The 2007 IPCC report said the Himalayan glaciers are receding faster than in any other part of the world, and at the current rate of global warming, they may disappear altogether by year 2035 or even earlier. Now the government report contradicts that, with a warning by the minister not to be alarmist.
We don't need to be alarmist like the IPCC was. We don't need to write the epitaph for the glaciers. I think the truth is incredibly complex.
The government report is based on a study of a dozen or so glaciers, though there are close to 10,000 glaciers in the Indian Himalayas. This says, till 2003, the Gangotri Glacier was retreating at 22 meters a year. Over the next 2 years, this slowed to nearly 12 meters. And between 2007 and June this year, the glacier has stood still. The government report goes on to cite the examples of the Siachen Glacier, which it says has not retreated much in the last 50 years. The 17-kilometer long Dokriani Glacier, the most studied in India, continues to retreat steadily, not faster as the UN predicted. These claims, backed by a NASA study that suggests Himalayan glaciers are located at much higher altitudes and have not felt the impacts of global warming. But the author of the original IPCC report stands firm.
Yes, I've seen that report. Glaciers are definitely retreating, but their response time is different in different climatic settings.
According to India's Environment Ministry, the Gangotri Glacier, the glaciers in the Himalayas and the Ganga are not going to dry up and finish away and waste away anytime soon, as the UN panel on climate change had forecast. In New Delhi, with camera person Manu Nair, Pallav Bagla for NDTV.
Well, joining us now is Dr. R.K. Pachauri, the chairman of the IPCC from here in Delhi. Dr. Pachauri, what's your first reaction to the Environment Ministry's report?
Well, I would like to ask where is the basis for this report? I mean, in a short period of time, largely with one scientist, whoever he may be and, you know, however distinguished he might be, the ministry comes to a conclusion of this kind, particularly when the sample is so small. And when you know that there is receding of the glaciers, if they are receding, then I'd like to ask, if it's not climate change, what's causing it? And why is it that climate change is causing melting of the Arctic ice?
But Dr.
for
Pachauri,
some reason,
this is the government's own findings based apparently on a lot of research done with various institutes, and it does have the government stamp on it. Are you questioning the credibility completely then of this report?
Well, I'm questioning these findings. They are totally wrong. This is one government. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change uses thousands of scientists. It uses peer-reviewed literature. I'd like to see how these findings have been arrived at on the basis of literature that's been published in prestigious, credible journals. This is, if I may say so, voodoo science. This is not science. This is purely opinion forming.
Well, the Environment Minister Jairam Ramesh says that the IPCC is alarmist.
Unless people want to hear, this is where I would rather stop it, because rest is now history. What the clash with IPCC showed was they were relying on literature which was grey literature, unpublished literature. Their own procedures said they have to rely on published work, and Dr. Ahuja is very familiar with the working of the IPCC. And now the glacier work, Dr. Navalgund and Professor Ramurthy, while he was in DST, have both been involved with, would know that this was not a peer-reviewed work which was used. But the happy part was, while I was very heavily put under pressure, literally seeking that I withdraw this story, which it appeared in Science as well. Let me come back to my PowerPoint. This is what they said, disappearing by the year 2035. That was the crucial figure. And this is what we wrote in the Science magazine. Even in 2009, this was what one of the top leading glaciologists said. They've got it horribly wrong. They were too quick to jump to conclusions on too little data. And you saw the way Dr. Pachauri was reacting. But in 2014, they accepted this and called it erroneous. The beauty was, in 2009 we did the story. In 2010 January, the IPCC gave finally, and till date, its only formal regret. But that was only a regret. They never accepted that it was erroneous. It took them 7 years to accept that it was erroneous. A lot of water flowed down the glaciers into the Ganges and into the Bay of Bengal and Arabian Sea. But people did not forget the story. This particular report came out on March 31st, 2014. I was again approached by people to write what was my experience. I did write for the Scientific American my experience, and some people have probably seen that write-up which was shared. But this is a tremendous example where both science and science journalism triumphed. If both can work together, the IPCC strengthened its procedures. It went through a review process with the Inter-Academy Council, IAC in Netherlands. They had a huge inquest by them, and the United Nations also did an inquest. But they came out stronger. That is the beauty of science, and that's what I love. People are willing to accept mistakes and move on. In many other fields, we don't see that happening. And that's why I love reporting science. If I'm passionate about science, it is for this reason, that there is a give and take which happens between the community and us. It's a very satisfying moment. Now, what I will do is, in the next few minutes I have, I'll quickly run through what, in my opinion, are the ways of bridging the gap. End of the day, life is all about that. Every decade of my life, I have done something new. If the last decade was television, maybe this coming decade for me could well be where I try and bridge that gap between, which is going between, developing between scientists / academicians and the public. As I said, it took a huge toll on me. What we need is a dialogue, and not that academicians and scientists live in silos, not stepping out, living in their own ivory towers, the public not feeling the benefits of what is being invested. And India is unique. 70 to 80% of the money comes from the taxpayer. It's my money. I have reason to seek answers from people who are doing science. I may not ask DRDO for reasons of national security or Indian Space Research Organization for different reasons, but then people need answers. This dialogue can today happen with or without the presence of somebody like me. And that is the wonderful part of this 21st century. And I will dwell some time on how this can be done. The person sitting or the politician usually doesn't read the journals. If they've seen fleeting impressions on the front page of the Times of India, they will remember it. And I always tell scientists, because most of this work is published, there is a golden period and there's a wonderful period. When a paper is accepted and before it is published, there is a gap. Sometimes there is an embargo, sometimes there is no embargo. That is a beautiful period in which academicians can approach communicators or themselves prepare how to communicate. What does my community want? 2 or 3 very simple things. The information is needed in that golden period. You need it accurately, and you need somebody who can talk to you in a language which my community can understand. I did my master's, was at the Indian Institute of Science. I do understand a bit of the language of the scientists. But a lot of my peers really are not skilled. Sometimes journalism is said is the last refuge of the scoundrel. So many of them are not trained enough. They don't have the skill. So you need people to explain. And believe me, a lot of it at very odd hours. In my personal life, I have woken scientists 3 o'clock at night when INS Arihant went critical, which is the chain reaction starting, it happened in the middle of the night at 3 o'clock. I woke up the director of BARC because I wanted information from the horse's mouth. The current director of BARC is the person who is responsible for the reactor inside INS Arihant. I don't hesitate in waking people up when there is a very big story. Otherwise, people who have seen me know. I first send an SMS, wait for people to call me back. But if there is a big story, I break all barriers. And personally, I don't accept a no. I don't. If there is a story that needs to be done, I will go right till the end. Now, simple things which aid, and I'm not using press release here, I'm saying an outreach release because things are changing. A simple A4 page, not more, not less, which explains things, what the new finding is. And please think visually. The world is visual. Most of us are very attuned to that. Still photos, video footage, interviews on camera, quotes, all of this should be available. And the last, animation and infographics. The least attended to. In fact, if I have a quibble with ISRO, it is a quibble on the Mangalyaan is that they never had an outstanding animation of the mission. They had an animation during Chandrayaan days. We went further, we made our own. That's a separate story. But ISRO never did that. And infographics. These are modern ways of communicating. You have to target everybody. There is no option but to engage with each other. People who don't engage, you know what happens. They get divorced. The complaint I get from my community is that scientists are inaccessible. When you need them, they are never available. If they are government scientists, they are forever in meetings. But there is a wonderful new tool called the mobile phone, which for some reason government scientists and government people carry with them in meetings and occasionally look at them. So I cut through that barrier by sending an SMS, and usually you get a response. I've gotten responses from middle of meetings from people. And what is the usual complaint I get from scientists is that my community, which is communicators, are always late. And I'm sure many people will agree with this. There is pressures of time and they should not be late, and I try never to be late, but then some people are late. And that we make mistakes, which is so very true. But if there is a dialogue, they can be bridged. The key point is to engage with each other during peacetime. And peace I'm using in a fashion of not the warmongering which happens on the border, but when both people are not hard-pressed. So you talk to each other ahead of time, you know each other. There is a certain understanding which is necessary between the two communities. So engage with people ahead of time. I spend an enormous amount of time when I'm not pursuing stories is to talk to the right people so that when I need, they are available to me and both of us understand each other's psyche and mindset. Otherwise, things can go drastically wrong. So engage with each other in peacetime. That is, if you ask me, one of the key things I learned in my 2-decade-long career. Now, I said there are ways in which today you don't need to have an intermediary like me. And scientists themselves can do it. There are in the audience people who are already engaging in this, and I don't need to preach to them, but there are so many others who need to do it. Blogs. Write 3 paragraphs, not more, 3 paragraphs. The same way as you sit down over dinner and explain to your child or hey mom, this is what I did today. I'm sure many people, my children and my mother asked me, what did you do today? And over the dinner table you explain. The same fashion. Write it up and explain. Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp, Google+, YouTube, all of them are free tools which can be used. And many people are using it. As I've said, the Secretary of the Department of Biotechnology is using it. The Indian Space Research Organization has used both Facebook and Twitter in their coverage of the Mars mission. YouTube, the Prime Minister has used Twitter. Failed or succeeded is your choice. You will decide tomorrow. But then he has used. Social media, I should also give the health warning. Please exercise discretion. The usual rules apply. Absolutely no flaming. It's very easy to flame on, get angry when somebody writes. Only use of civil language. Every bit of information on the internet can be tracked back to your computer and who wrote it when. Every bit of information. And please take comments in the stride. I get, when I write a story, 50, 60, 70, sometimes 500 comments. There was one fellow who was constantly trolling me about some communalism. Nothing to do with the story on ISRO, but every time he would write about communalism and Hindu-Muslim riots. You have to ignore it. You can't bother. But there's the other side also. If nobody comments, don't take it to heart. That does not mean that nobody read it. Many people read it. You go to the analytics of Google, it shows how many people read and how few people put ink to paper to put a comment down. This is a challenge. You need an enabling environment, and I'm seeing this happening slowly in our country. Many heads of institution need skill building. I don't have the opportunity today, otherwise there is an interview of the secretary of a high-ranking department who walked out of my interview. I said, if I were an average journalist, the main interview I would dump and only show your walking out of the interview. We didn't. We held back that information. So there is a need for skill building. I'm not sure whether Professor Ramamurthy was trained how to handle media when he became secretary. I remember in a press conference he called me, Pallav is an unguided missile. I remember him having said this. There are others who have headed institutions. You need to learn this skill. And it's very simple. Somebody just needs to explain to you what this community wants, which is my community. Simple training is needed for scientists, academicians, researchers. Very easy to do. Just a little engagement, not more. Most people are using Facebook and Twitter and YouTube, especially the generation which is passing out in this century. And early exposure to the media. This is an area in which an institution like NIAS can provide an environment where both communities can engage. And you need to engage not just with academicians, you need to engage with all stakeholders. Industry, my God, how much they have suffered because of, you ask Monsanto and Mahiko, they will tell you how much they have suffered, $1 million. Separate story that I was the first one to be sued by Monsanto, and I still survive with my pants on. It's a rarity. You get sued by Monsanto, you lose your pants. That's the normal rule. I did. Clinical trials, nuclear industry, how much it has been pillared. And we are currently seeing this, a non-communicative government and the price it is paying. You also need to engage with politicians. They need bragging points. When they fund something, they need to brag. If Narendra Modi did something in Gujarat, and if the Space Application Center if he can pop in there and brag about it and host people there for meal, as Dr. Nawal Gun told me, he feels happy, he feels engaged. But in the end, it's about the public feeling let down. And that is sad, and I feel very, very disheartened by that. What do we need for journalists and communicators? First thing, make them feel welcome. Most people feel journalists have horns. They will come and stab you. That is what the regular impression is. No, I'm standing here in front of you. I'm as human. I may get on the front of television. That's a separate story. But they also need skill building. Journalists are by and large basic graduates. They have not done more than that. Very few people. The Ramchandrans are, who's the person who's the editor at Hindu, is a rarity who went to TIFR and did that, but very few. We need to hold workshops where you can show people the way scientists work. And this is something which I am pushing very hard. We'll need to find ways of doing it, which is to have journalists go into laboratories and actually do experiments themselves. That's the easiest way of learning. Field visits. If somebody can see how a ring laser gyro is made, I'm not saying DRDO will allow anybody inside there, because you need very, very people on whom they can rely. Because if they tell me, don't shoot on the left, only shoot on the right, we would abide by that. I would not give them editorial control of what my story would be. I have never given anybody any editorial control. But for national security, if people tell you, don't shoot this side, shoot this side, this particular part of the missile we are not showing, this we are going to develop later and use, we hear things later, but that you do that. There is a need for an incubator or a place where you can catalyze some action, so that there is a brokering of a middle ground. The scientists don't talk, the journalists find themselves alienated. What do you need? You need simple things. So impart new skills. This is something where scientists and people can reach out directly, which is very popular in Europe, which is holding scientific cafes, which is an evening program. You go out, people have coffee. If you get a 5-star to fund it, you might even be able to do it over wine and cheese, whatever, it depends. But hold simple interactions. Meet the scientist events, very interesting. I'm still gunning, and I'm hoping that I'll be able to get Rakesh Sharma, who's celebrating India is celebrating its 30th anniversary of flying to space, to NIAS and have an engagement. Then celebrate success and failures both. And this for me is going to be the biggest challenge, which is the use of the mother tongue. Best communication happens in this. जितना मुझे हिंदी में बोलने में मजा आता है, वो अंग्रेजी में नहीं आता। मेरा हिंदी का चैनल मुझसे हरदम कहता है, पल्लव, तुम्हारी शादी तो इंग्लिश वाले चैनल से हुई है 24/7 से, क्योंकि बगार वहां से आती है, लेकिन तुम्हारी मोहब्बत जो है वो एनडीटीवी इंडिया से है, विच इज ट्रू। मेरे को सबसे ज्यादा मजा हिंदी में आता है। मैं लिखता नहीं हूं, लेकिन बोलता बहुत हूं हिंदी में। और लैंग्वेज नहीं आती, लेकिन करना पड़ेगा, क्योंकि अल्टीमेटली अगर आपको कुडनकुलम में करना है तो तमिल में करना पड़ेगा, अगर आपको जैतापुर का हैंडल करना है तो मराठी में करना पड़ेगा या कोंकणी में करना पड़ेगा। उसी तरह से जैसे जैसे इशू आएंगे, यू हैव टू हैंडल इन द मदर टंग, एंड दिस इज अ चैलेंज, अ ह्यूज चैलेंज। It's not rocket science. It's very simple. Listen, just do it. Make an honest effort, it will happen. That's my very simple message. It doesn't take long. Because winning back the public trust is the most critical. What do you and me have? कहते हैं ना, खाली हाथ आते हैं और खाली हाथ जाएंगे, उससे ज्यादा कुछ नहीं ले जाएंगे। ना आए थे ना लेके जाएंगे। क्रेडिबिलिटी और ट्रस्ट है हमारे पास, और जनता का ट्रस्ट अगर छूट जाए, इफ यू लूज द ट्रस्ट ऑफ द पब्लिक, देन दैट्स सीरियस। वी जस्ट नीड टू मेक एन ऑनेस्ट एफर्ट। थ्रू 20 years of doing this, my understanding is that the public and the scientists and the academicians are really made for each other. There is no difference. The boundaries have been created only recently. The silos have been created. It's not difficult. End of the day, science done in secret helps nobody. Making an Agni 5 missile, if DRDO needed to show it, anything done in the civilian domain on understanding the brain or understanding the cell certainly needs to be told to the public. And India more so, because we rely so much on public funding. That, if you ask me, is the key message I want to leave you with. It's been a pleasure being at NIAS, which has been so welcoming to a rank outsider like me who's a journalist. The faculty, the students, the staff at NIAS have been outstanding in welcoming me, and I thank them for that. And I'm available for you to ask any question on the way I practice journalism. If you ask me how India TV does journalism, I can't answer that because we don't practice it that way. But the way we have done it, for good or bad, this is where I am. Every morning when I do a story, I say, I'm available on the crossroad, anybody can pelt a stone because everything I do is in the public domain. So here is your opportunity now to throw all the stones, and I promise not to duck them. Thank you.
Thank you, Pallav. We have time for a few questions. Yes, Setar starts.
Thanks for sharing your experience. Is the glacier issue as received as full stop, or do you think there will be third opinion and the argument will go on? The policy may be because, see, 2003-5 may not be the deadline. It may be 2007-5. And I do not see that the policy is really, the kind of a policy to regret what has been predicted. This is one. And the second thing that I have found, especially relating to the communication success that you have achieved, how much you owe it to the NDTV? And without the brand of NDTV, could you have succeeded, especially in the second story?
The first question is the glacier story a full stop? In science, there are no full stops. There are only commas. So it's a pause. Nobody knows that in global warming, there is a pause. So you never know what is happening. Scientists don't fully comprehend what is happening. And this week, the IPCC has given its report, and they have said in that, and I am not a denialist, the George Bushes of the world embraced me in 2009 when I wrote the story, because they are the guys who are climate denialists. I am not a denialist. I accept climate is changing, things are warming up, the glaciers are receding, but whether they are receding fast enough or not. This week there is a paper in Current Science which says 86% of the glaciers are stable. I have no idea on what is happening on the glaciers. I tramp a small portion. It's a paper from the Space Application Center. They are at complete loggerheads with an ex-employee of the Space Application Center who works at the Indian Institute of Science, who believes differently. So the last word has not been written. But the glaciers are not melting in the same fashion as the IPCC was saying. There was a bit of scaremongering there. The scaremongering is what bothers me.
But everyone that expresses their view, marginally they are receding.
Pardon?
Was the question. Marginally there is a recession, they are receding. That is the thing that in the film emerged.
That is true. Most glaciers are receding. There is no doubt about that. But
those which are actually lower altitude and which are facing southern hemisphere, south side, they are receding, but not at the rates at which they were receding earlier. whereas those glaciers which are on the northern side and facing north and the higher altitudes, they are not receding. Many of them are stable, and some of them in fact have advanced. So over